Welcome to another episode of Gospel Entrepreneurs, and I'm really pleased to have a good friend. We go back quite a long way, Tim Jupp. You probably know him for Big Church Day Out. You may even know him for Delirious, but he's got some real insights around faith and what faith means. And does faith actually mean risk? We're going to have a conversation and just find out how that entrepreneurial gift came into his life and how he's nurtured it and framed it to be used by God. I think you'll really be inspired and encouraged as you listen to this podcast. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Roy. Good to see you again.
And you, it's been a while.
It has been, yeah.
Tim, give us a little bit of your background. You live in the southeast. I mean, just tell us where you are, where you're based, a little bit about you.
Yeah, I live in a little village called Rustington, next to a town called Littlehampton. Married to Becca. My wife leads the church in Littlehampton. We have about 500 people in our church, and she leads that. We have 4 grown-up children, 6 grandchildren. But like you said, I've always lived on the south coast. So, yeah, definitely a man who loves his walk along the beach.
That's amazing. What a privilege. Tim, tell us a bit about you. I knew you probably first and foremost when you were in Delirious.
Well, that started, back in 92. Before that, I had a little former life. When I left school, I worked with a guy that only people of a certain age would remember, called Ishmael, and we did children's stuff. And I did that for 12 years when I left school. We used to travel around the UK, doing really family, praise party, worship events. And we did the kids' work at Spring Harvest. I think I did 12 years at Spring Harvest on the trot without stopping with him.
What did you do for him, Tim? What was your role in that?
Well, I was playing keyboards for him.
Okay.
And then ended up kind of making all his records. And out of that, I started making lots of other people's records. And then I built a studio out of that. And then Martin Smith, who was in Delirious, came and joined me. We ran a studio together. This is kind of very early 90s onwards. And we did a lot of the UK kind of worship albums back in those days. We used to record a lot of the live events like Stony Bible Week and New Wine, Grapevine, those kind of events. We did Matt Revan's first 2 albums and Noel Richards and Graham Kendrick. So this is going back, over 30 years ago. So we used to do that in our little one-horse seaside town here on the coast.
And Tim, were you always keyboards or guitar, or were you always musical? Was that your thing, do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a great musician by any means, but I love music. And one half of my brain was in that space. And then the other half of my brain was always in the space of trying to figure things out and how we do things. So even from the Delirious days, I kind of managed things and sort out the business of what we did, if you like. And I enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed the music too. So I kind of did both things. And definitely in Delirious, I was hiding behind better musicians in the band. And trying to not get found out, hiding in the back of the stage, playing the keyboards, but because I so much wanted to be part of the journey. Yeah, I was also busy back in the office when we were at home too, doing both things.
Would you say you were an entrepreneur, Tim? Or would you say you're much more operational manager? Where would you kind of put your park the musician piece, but that organisational piece?
I think that comes really, Roy, from I probably had a vision early on. Some influential people around me in my teenage years making me think, do you know what, I feel like this is what God's asked me to do, something in the music space. I remember going to the pastor of our church when I was probably about 14, and he said kind of, what do you want to do when you grow up, sort of thing. And I was like, well, I want to do music in the church world. He said, well, you can kind of forget that because nobody does that. And that was back in the day when really no one did do that for a living. And maybe America was just starting to maybe employ worship leaders in some of the very big churches, but it wasn't really something you did as a job. So I guess maybe what looks like entrepreneurial side to what I did was more a sense of me going for what I felt God had called me to do. And it ends up looking like being an entrepreneur, doesn't it? Because it's like okay, I need to have some strategy around how I'm going to get from A to B, because if God's asking me to do something, I'm going to go for this, and I've got to figure out how we do this.
So you didn't want to work for anyone. You always wanted to do your own thing, didn't you, Tim?
I was always happy to be part of teams. I didn't mind working for people. I think it was more, I just felt this deep sense of this is kind of what I've got to do with my life. The only proper job I ever had, my dad, is a great Christian man. He was also like, well, you still got to get a proper job. But he hooked me up with a bank manager friend, and I went to work in a bank for 18 months when I left school. That was the only proper job I ever had in my life. And I remember the bank manager calling me into his room one day and saying, well, do you see yourself doing my job when you're my age? And I just said to him, well, there's no chance I'll even be in the bank when I'm your age. No aspiration to do that. I kind of felt like I knew where I was going to go. I just hadn't quite figured out how to get there at that point.
So Delirious was an amazing ride, and God used it. It was an amazing journey, and you obviously were key in the managerial side of that as well as the music side of that.
Well, the band was 17 years altogether, so it was definitely a chapter of my life for sure. It was quite a long time, and I remember on that journey definitely not having ever had a plan B.
Yeah.
So we were kind of running with plan A, which is really good in some ways because it makes you very focused and it keeps you in your lane and it keeps you on track with where you think you're supposed to be going. Things were going okay in some ways with the band, but it was very much a team dynamic. And Martin, who was kind of fronting the band up on the stage in the public space, he decided it was time to call it a day back in 2008. We'd done 17 years by then. I think we all knew at that point, well, that's going to be the end of the band. And so that wasn't an easy time because I think when you start things entrepreneurial, you're never quite sure how to start them. And you certainly don't have conversations around how you're going to end things either.
No.
So we were often stepping into things that we knew and felt like we were pushing the boat out in many ways. And one of the new things that we had to do at that point was end something. So we'd never done that. We had to figure that out. And it wasn't the easiest time because I think the reality is when you're in a team dynamic doing something together, you don't all wake up one morning and everyone collectively thinks, do you know what, I think today's the day when we're going to stop everything. And it certainly wasn't like that for us. I think some people were really keen to keep going, but we had to be pragmatic about it. It probably was time to call it a day, and we had to figure that out. And what was interesting for me, Roy, is that I had never, ever had any other conversations about doing anything else in my life once the band was going. But strangely enough, just 1 month before Martin dropped what was quite a bombshell on us that he was going to leave, I had a meeting set up for me by a friend with this family who own this country estate in Sussex, which is where Big Church Festival now takes place and has done ever since. I was sent along to meet this family to keep my friend happy. Turns out the family had had a lot of prophetic words about using their land for people gathering and pictures of tents on the land and that kind of stuff. And I think they thought, oh, maybe this guy's going to come along and be part of that prophetic thing that we've done. And I thought, well, this is really exciting. I can sense God in the conversation. But we were busy with the bands, and so I kind of parked that idea there. 2 weeks later, I had another guy call me who was a business guy in London who also had a vision for doing something in the kind of space of church unity, bringing churches together. We had a conversation and I thought, oh, this is interesting. You're interested. And I said, well, I met this family down in Sussex. They've got some land. And he's like, you won't believe it, but I know that family too. And that could be amazing. At that point, it's getting a bit difficult because I was slightly getting privately excited about this.
Yeah.
Still couldn't do anything with it. And then only 2 weeks after that, we were in America on a trip for 10 days. We were just about to go on stage in some big church with 10,000 people in it. And we were in the car park and Martin said, oh, by the way, everyone, I've got some news. I think it's time to quit.
Oh, he told you in the car park while you're sitting in the van?
Half an hour before we were going to go on stage. So, yeah, it was slightly difficult because we had a whole week to go before we even got home. And I thought, okay, we've got to figure out how the band ends. That's a sad thing. That's a difficult thing. We had to work that out. But similarly, I went back to these folk I'd met and said, look, you won't believe this. Strangely enough, this is the only conversation I've ever had. I might have a bit more time on my hands coming up. How about it? We talked about a vision of gathering the church in the UK. What would that look like? Could we simply create a space for people to come together? And I was aware there was a lot of conversations around church unity and that sort of thing and people coming together. But what I'd noticed was that seemed to be mainly in the space for leaders often getting together, maybe from different expressions of church, and you have the churches together type dynamic and different things. But no one was like saying, well, what about the people? What does it look like if the people got together? Wouldn't it be amazing to do that? And I think what's hard to know is that then entrepreneurial? Is that almost like responding to the prompting of God in it? And I guess maybe it's both, because I think if it's purely just entrepreneurial, then it's probably us trying to make something out of nothing that we think is maybe a good idea. If it's just saying God said it and we don't have anything else surrounding that to confirm that in terms of whether maybe that's a bit nuts too. So I think it was a bit of the two. And maybe I had that entrepreneurial thing in me to push it through, because what we took on was a bit of a daunting thing. Yeah, here we are, 15 years later, and Big Church is now definitely the largest annual gathering of Christians that happens place in Europe every year now. And we'll have 35,000 there this year.
It is amazing, but obviously the journey from the seed of an idea to make it happen that first year must have been the most daunting thing that you'd taken on, Tim.
I think so. And it takes, I think, a combination of trying to feel like you have the confidence in what God's asking you to do, being brave in some ways, probably being a little bit crazy in others. And I think what I learned on the way, Roy, is that I've often heard people in talks say faith is spelled R-I-S-K. We've all heard that kind of phrase. And I've heard that for a long time, until one day I figured out that's actually not right. I don't actually believe that at all. I think faith is being sure and certain of the things that God's asking. And that's what the Bible says about faith, is being sure and certain. And if you're sure and certain, then is that risky? The riskiest thing in life is probably not being obedient to what God's asked you to do. So if you want to live with risk in your life, you just go your own way. Because when you look at what we do, on the face of it, on the human level, it's just absolutely riddled and full of risk. It's just ridiculous. I had a guy come up to me at the festival last year who I'd never met. It's just somebody who was attending. He said, "Excuse me, Tim." He said, "Would you mind, could I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He says, "Why do you do this when so much can go so wrong?" And I just thought that was a brilliant question, because that's exactly something what I feel I live with every day. It's like, why do we do this when so much can go so wrong? Yeah, I feel like if you're in the right space where God wants you, that's the safe place to be. That's not really the risky place to be.
It involves courage, and it involves stepping into that and embracing that without a doubt. Because obviously, I don't know what the budget is of Big Church to have, but I remember you saying every year, and still every year, the figures have got to add up. But all of that, from a standing start, Tim, to get to that first year, must have been an amazing journey or ride to get the support, the bands, everything in place. Was that what you'd gleaned from 17 years of running a band with Delirious, from what you'd done church-wise, that all that came together now in this almost preparation for what you're now doing?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think definitely on a relational level, because what we do at Big Church is built around music and worship, and I was just in a very privileged place where for many years I got to know lots of people, because we spent really a lot of time in America and other places, and so you build those connections, and it was that ability to reach out and invite people, and hopefully they had enough of a measure of trust to know that I wasn't messing around. This is for real. So that definitely helped. And I think having some of the strategic approach around how we do the delivery of things. What was interesting about Delirious' journey, which many people will know, is we were known because we kind of owned everything and did everything on ourselves. And that wasn't because we wouldn't work with people, but I think we felt a responsibility to steward the vision that God had given us and to be the ones that were able to shape that, rather than if you give everything away to record labels and management companies and all these people, in the end, their stuff ends up shaping what you're doing rather than what you feel God's calling you to do. We felt protective around that. So we retained that kind of ownership, but then it meant we had to run everything ourselves. So we had many years of organising our tours and promoting stuff and marketing stuff. And we had about 40 staff that worked for us all year long. We were distributing records in 100 different countries around the world. So we had a whole business thing going on behind us, and that definitely played into the big church side of things. And I mean, you talk about budgets, it's not private because we're a charity, so anyone can see our charity accounts, but I think we started off with about £500,000 budget in year one, and it's now at 5 million budget a year just to get a few people together in the field every year. It's crazy.
Two interesting things from what you said, Tim. First of all, that ownership of the vision and the calling that you had on Delirious is also similar to where a lot of people would want to shape big church or hold it. You've held it very tightly in what it is and owning what you feel God has given you. Obviously, there's innovation and creativity, but the core value that you own has always remained true over that period, hasn't it?
Yes, I'd say that is true, yeah.
I think that's why God's favour's on it, because as you say, other people want a piece of it or they want to shape it, and you're not out of relationship with those people, but you recognise what you bring and what they bring, which I think is really important to jealously guard the gift or the calling that God's placed on your life. And then on someone else's life, that's fine. But it'll be sad to come to the end of it and God say to you, well, why'd you do that? I never told you to do that. I told you to do this, which is where you've kind of sat, isn't it, Tim, through all of that? And that must increase with the size of the platform and the influence that you have.
I probably could honestly feel I could look back and say I don't have regrets, because I think it doesn't mean that as you do things in life, with hindsight, you can often look back and say, well, I might have done this or that differently. And that's fine, because at the moment in time, I think if you're doing it with the best intention and with the knowledge and experience and everything you have, that's great. That doesn't mean that's always the right decision. But I think the regret would come from kind of missing really what God's called you to do, because we only have one life in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's even shorter than one life. If you look at our working years, maybe that's only 40 or 50 years. So you get one shot at that. So I don't get to have another working life and think, well, now I can start again doing the things that God wants me to do. So I think for some people, what I'm doing could look like, oh, that's quite radical. You make radical decisions. You do things that I wouldn't be brave enough to have. I like to think that I'm not sure God really requires us or asks us to be radical. I think God asks us to be obedient. And sometimes it just looks like that. So I think being entrepreneurial is great, but being obedient is greater.
I do understand exactly what you mean. And I think that obedience to the entrepreneurial gift or to what you see, or obedience to the conversation you had to recognize God is speaking, actually means, oh dear, this is going to be a challenge from here to there. But if I don't do it, I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life. So actually, there's that kind of, I've got to do it because I think God's in it. But you often only know that when you look back, because it could have gone all completely wrong. There is that point, isn't there, where you're like, well, I'm going to give it my everything because I think God's in it and I'm going to be obedient. But there's a lot of not knowing until it's happened.
Yes, and I think you hit on a really great point there. And I think you do it as if your life depends on it because God's called you to do it. So you need to move in obedience and do it. But I think the learning is how do we hold in tension this? Because one of the greatest paradoxes, I think, in the Christian faith is you've got God who's the Alpha and Omega, the mystery of God and the bigness of something that we can never comprehend and understand, who doesn't really need us for anything at all because he created the earth and beyond and, and everything like that. Yet the paradox is somehow he chooses us to be his hands and feet here on the earth. And isn't that extraordinary that in some ways, well, he doesn't need us, but we get to play a part in the story of God here on the earth and he works through us. So we have to hold that intention in the things that we do. And I think in this conversation, you really highlighted the two biggest chapters of my life is doing Delirious and then doing Big Church. And I think, particularly for us blokes, we're renowned for often finding our identity in the things that we do.
Yeah.
Well, certainly coming to the end of the Delirious story was like, there is a real reality check on, am I okay? Because I was like a steam train going at 100 miles an hour, suddenly coming to an end. I don't have that anymore. Am I okay? Is this okay? In that moment, you're like, is my identity in God? If it's not, then you can come crashing down because you wonder who you are. And you see it in blokes, you even see it in blokes at the end of their working life. So, well, I can't retire. I can't, I'm going to always work for the Lord because often really it's about their identity and they're afraid of losing it because it's in what they do rather than who they are. I can't wait to retire one day. I love doing what I do and I feel it's the right thing, but I don't feel my whole identity is dependent on that. And with Big Church, we were 35% Gen Z, we're now 55%.
Wow.
I mean, it's such a different space. It's almost like we're the old analog generation. They're the digital generation, both literally and also in the analogy of that. So they think differently, they talk differently, they gather differently, they do things differently. And I think entrepreneurially, it won't just be, oh, this is our generation saying this is the way we did it, this is how you can do things. Because I just think they do things differently. I think it's really exciting what's going on and all these conversations around this spiritual awakening in that age group.
Yeah, and the Bible is key, going to the core text, all of that has been a massive shift. Even not what people say or think, I'm going to go there and see what that says. It's an exciting time, really exciting.
And I think there's a lot in that generation. They're not even necessarily in our churches. It will spill over into our churches for sure. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's the next move of church, whether that's a house church type movement or whatever. So I'll be fine about retiring because I just enjoy watching what's going on. And I think holding that intention is a real learning thing. And with Big Church, it's not a hard thing to learn because every year we think we're going to go bust at the end of every event. So you're always holding in line. You're thinking, well, surely this year is the end of it. And that is so true for me in the last 5 years because I've had 2 years of COVID and 3 years of thinking we won't survive after COVID. And here we are still going and it's growing again. And only by the grace of God are we here.
Which is amazing. And it's leading within the calling that God has given you. And it gives you the grace to live with that. Some people can't live with that. And you can because of where you are. Tim, we're almost coming into land. People have listened to your story. We've heard about being obedient. That's the bottom line, not faith is risk. Faith is obedience. What would you say to people listening that have tuned into this, just as we come in, some final words that you want to say on where you are? I mean, obviously, we'd love them all to go to Big Church Day Out and be part of Big Church Day Out. But apart from that, Tim, just give us some of your wisdom and insight for people listening.
Well, that's a big question. I suppose my obvious answer is if God can use me, he can use anyone. I feel very unqualified a lot of the time. I feel very like I don't always have what it needs, but I'm joyful and thankful that I get to do what I do. I think get to know the voice of God, get to listen to God, stay close to Jesus in it all. And then you can trust those hunches that you get in stuff. I'm not on my knees kind of praying through every single decision. I am using my intuition, my gut feeling, if you like, my sense of what I need to do, because I feel like if God's entrusted me to carry this thing that I'm in, then he's equipped me with the wisdom and the knowledge to make the calls that I need to make. And that doesn't mean that we don't pray either, because we do both. But I think, like you say, do as if your life depends on it, but don't worry if it goes wrong.
Exactly. But I think the other thing about you, Tim, as I've seen you engage with other people, you know who you are. You're a guardian of the vision that God has given you. So you're confident in that. But you also have a humility that just says, hey, I'm just doing what I believe God has called me to do, which is a great way to operate in life and in knowing your calling, because then humility and walking humbly with God is what it's all about. It's not all about us and me. It's I'm delivering something that's amazing, but actually I'm just being obedient to what God has asked me to do. And all of that plays into this sweet spot that you're in.
Thank you. Yeah.
Tim, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. And as Tim said, I think it's really important that we find that obedience, knowing what God has called you to do, and do it. Thank you so much, Tim. I've really enjoyed this conversation. This has been a Gospel Entrepreneurs UCB podcast. Thank you for listening. God bless you.